Clara Bennett's blood dripped onto the auction platform, each drop hitting the frozen wood with a sound she'd never forget. Her dead husband's wedding ring was gone, torn from her finger by the men who'd killed the stage driver and dragged her here. The December wind cut through her torn dress, but she barely felt it. What she felt was the crowd's eyes, hungry and cruel, as the auctioneer grabbed her arm and shoved her forward. 28 years old, a widow, and now this. She closed her eyes and prayed for the first time since Jacob died. Before we continue Clara's story, please subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Stay with us until the very end to see how her darkest moment becomes her greatest salvation. And comment below with your city name. We love seeing how far these stories travel across America. Now let's return to that frozen auction platform in Sweetwater Station, where everything is about to change. The auctioneer's breath reeked of whiskey when he leaned close. "Smile, widow woman. Men pay more for pretty." Clara kept her eyes down. Her temple throbbed where the rifle butt had caught her during the attack. The wound had stopped bleeding an hour ago, but fresh blood seeped down her neck now as he yanked her forward by the rope tied around her wrists. Someone in the crowd whistled. Another man laughed. "Let's start the bidding at $50, the auctioneer called out. "She's got all her teeth can read and write, and she's already broke in for a man seeing as she's widowed." The crowd of miners and drifters pressed closer to the platform. Clara tried to count them, maybe 30 men, but her vision kept blurring. The Montana cold bit through her dress. She'd lost her coat during the struggle. Lost everything, really. Her husband Jacob's grave was 600 miles behind her in Kansas. Her sister Sarah was supposed to be waiting in Sacramento, and here she stood in some nameless mining camp called Sweetwater Station, about to be sold like a breeding mare. "50's too steep for damaged goods," someone called out. "She ain't damaged," the auctioneer shot back. "Just a little worn from travel. Look at them hands she can work." He grabbed Clara's bound wrists and held them up. Her fingers were raw and cracked from the cold, the nails broken. She'd tried to fight when the Taggart brothers attacked the coach, tried to run. The driver had died with his gun still holstered. The only other passenger, an old preacher, had taken a bullet to the chest before he could even pray. $30, a man called out. He was missing most of his teeth. 35, another countered. Clara's knees started to buckle. The auctioneer's hand clamped on her shoulder fingers, digging in hard enough to bruise. "Stand up straight. Don't shame me in front of these buyers." She forced herself upright. The sky above was the color of old iron, heavy with snow that hadn't fallen yet. December 1878. She should have been with Sarah by now. Should have been starting over, learning to live without Jacob's quiet presence beside her in bed. Instead, she was here. $40. The bidding continued, slow and deliberate, like men haggling over a plow horse. Clara tried to remember how she'd gotten here. The stagecoach leaving Cheyenne, the Taggart brothers appearing on the road like wolves, the gunfire, the old preacher's blood on her hands as she tried to stop the bleeding, Lucas Taggart's cold smile as he tied her wrists. "You'll fetch a good price," he'd said. "Pretty enough, and you got that look about you, like you've known sorrow. Men like that in a woman makes you grateful." She'd spit in his face. He'd struck her with his rifle. $50, a new voice called, young, eager. 55, another man countered, older, mean-sounding. Clara's head swam. She needed water, needed to sit down, needed to wake up from this nightmare and find herself back in Kansas with Jacob, back when the world made sense. $60, the auctioneer grinned. "Now we're getting somewhere." A door slammed somewhere behind the crowd, boots on frozen ground coming closer. The men near the back turned to look. 65, the mean-sounding man said. Clara lifted her head slightly, trying to see what had caught everyone's attention. Through the blur of her vision and the press of bodies, she saw him. Tall, dark hair touching his collar, a heavy coat dusted with snow. He walked like a man who'd traveled far and wasn't afraid of where he'd ended up. But it was his face that made her breath catch, not because he was handsome, though he was in a hard-weathered way, but because of what that face revealed. High cheekbones, copper skin a few shades darker than the white men around him. Eyes so dark they looked black. Half-breed, her mind supplied. That's what Jacob would have called him, what most people called men with Indian blood. The crowd parted for him, but not out of respect, out of wariness, maybe disgust. "Well now," the auctioneer drawled, "didn't expect to see you in town, Morrison." The man Morrison didn't answer. He kept walking until he stood at the base of the platform looking up at Clara with those impossible dark eyes. She couldn't read his expression. Couldn't tell if he saw her as human or just another thing to buy. "You here to bid?" the auctioneer asked. "Because I'll warn you, some of these gentlemen might object to $100. The crowd went silent. Clara stared at him. $100. That was 3 months' wages for a working man. That was— Now hold on. The mean-sounding man pushed forward. "I was bidding 70. 100, Morrison repeated. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Cash." The auctioneer's eyes went wide. "Well, that's a mighty generous offer, but—" "You takin' his money?" someone in the crowd demanded. "He's half-Lakota case you ain't noticed." "Money's money," the auctioneer said, but his voice wavered. "Not his money," another man said. "My daddy died fighting redskins. I ain't standing here while one of them buys himself a white woman." Morrison's hand moved to his hip, not threatening exactly, just resting near where a gun would be. Clara saw it then, the holstered Colt worn and well used. "The lady's bleeding," Morrison said, still quiet. "She needs a doctor. You men want to stand here arguing about my bloodline, or you want to let me pay what she's worth. She ain't worth 100 to nobody but a savage looking for a white woman to—" Morrison moved fast. One moment, he was standing still. The next, he had the speaker by the collar, lifting him half off his feet. "Say that again." The man's face went red, then purple. He clawed at Morrison's wrist, but couldn't break the grip. "Let him go," the auctioneer said nervously. "Let's not have trouble." Morrison held on for another heartbeat, then released him. The man stumbled back gasping. $100. Morrison said again, pulling a leather pouch from his coat. "Take it or refuse it. But if you refuse, I'm walking her off this platform anyway, and we can sort out the payment after." The auctioneer looked at the pouch, then at the crowd, then back at Morrison. Clara saw the calculation in his eyes. $100 was $100. And Morrison, for all his mixed blood, had a reputation. She didn't know what kind of reputation. She'd never been to Sweetwater Station before today, but she could see it in the way the other men shifted uneasily. "Sold," the auctioneer said quickly, "to Mr. Morrison." He snatched the pouch and weighed it in his palm, nodding. Morrison climbed the platform steps. Clara's heart hammered. Up close, she could see the scar that ran from his left temple down to his jaw. Could see the snow melting in his dark hair. Could see the weariness in his eyes, like he'd witnessed every cruelty the world had to offer and was tired of it. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I'm going to cut those ropes. Don't run. I mean you no harm." She didn't believe him, couldn't afford to. But she also couldn't run, not in her condition, so she stood still as he drew a knife and cut through the rope binding her wrists. Blood rushed back into her hands, painful and hot. "Can you walk?" he asked. Clara tried. Her legs gave out. Morrison caught her before she hit the platform, one arm around her waist. The crowd murmured. Someone made a crude comment. Morrison ignored them, sheathing his knife and looking down at Clara with something that might have been concern. "I'm going to carry you," he said. "If that's all right." "Do I have a choice?" Her voice came out hoarse. Something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, maybe? Or recognition? "No, ma'am. I suppose you don't." He lifted her like she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. Clara wanted to fight, wanted to scream, but she had no strength left. Her head lolled against his shoulder. Through her fading vision, she saw the crowd watching, saw their judgment and disgust. "You'll regret this, Morrison," someone called out. "Probably," Morrison agreed. He carried her down the platform steps and through the parting crowd. Clara's last clear thought before darkness took her was that she'd escaped one kind of hell only to land in another. But at least this hell was warm. She woke to firelight and the smell of coffee. For a moment, Clara thought she was back in Kansas, back in the little soddy she'd shared with Jacob. But the ceiling above her was wrong wooden planks instead of prairie grass and earth. And the pain was wrong too. Jacob's dying had been a slow agony of fever and delirium. This pain was sharp and immediate, centered in her temple and radiating down her neck. "Easy," Morrison's voice low and careful. "You're safe." Clara turned her head. He sat in a chair beside the narrow bed where she lay holding a tin cup. Steam rose from it, carrying the bitter-sweet smell of coffee and something else. Whiskey, maybe. "Where am I?" "My cabin. About 3 miles outside Sweetwater." She tried to sit up. Her head spun and she fell back against the pillow. "I said easy." Morrison set the cup aside and leaned forward. "You've got a concussion, maybe a skull fracture. The bleeding stopped, but you need to stay still." "You're not a doctor." "No, ma'am, but I've seen enough head wounds to know how to treat one." Cavalry, Clara thought. He'd been cavalry. She could tell by the way he moved, by the old military coat hanging by the door. "Why did you buy me?" she asked. Morrison sat back, his face unreadable in the firelight. "You really want to know?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, 2 years ago, I passed through a town in Kansas, Lawrence. My saddlebags had torn, and I needed them mended. Only one person in town would take my money, a woman who ran a leather goods shop with her husband. She didn't care that I was half-Lakota, treated me like any other customer, even invited me to stay for supper, though her husband looked uneasy about it. Clara's breath caught. "That was you." "You remember?" She did. She remembered the tall man with dark eyes and a cavalry coat, remembered Jacob's discomfort, remembered her own insistence that they show Christian charity. She'd mended his bags and charged him fair price and thought nothing more of it. "You remembered me?" she asked. "After 2 years. Yes, ma'am. Not many people treat me with simple decency. I remember every one." Clara closed her eyes. The irony was almost funny. Almost. "So you bought me out of gratitude because I mended your saddlebags?" "I bought you because those men would have hurt you," Morrison said flatly. "Because I know what it's like to be sold and owned and treated like you're less than human, and because I owed you a debt. I don't want to be owned by anyone, even out of gratitude." "You're not owned." Morrison stood, moving to the small stove in the corner. He poured coffee from a battered pot into 2 cups. "You're free to leave whenever you're well enough to travel. I'll give you money for stage fare, help you get to wherever you were headed." "California," Clara said. "My sister's in Sacramento. Long way to go in December." He brought her a cup, helped her sit up enough to drink without spilling. The coffee was strong and bitter, cutting through the fog in her head. "But it can be done. The train runs from Cheyenne. I can get you there." Clara studied him over the rim of the cup. His face was all hard planes and sharp angles made harsher by the firelight. But his hands were gentle as he adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. "Why are you being kind to me?" Morrison's jaw tightened. "Kindness is just treating people like people, ma'am. Shouldn't need a reason for that." She wanted to argue, wanted to find the trap hidden in his words, but exhaustion pulled at her like a riptide. Her eyes closed against her will. "Sleep," Morrison said. "You're safe here, I promise." Clara wanted to tell him she didn't believe in promises anymore. Jacob had promised to grow old with her, and he'd died before his 30th birthday. The Taggart brothers had promised they'd let her go if she didn't fight. Lucas Taggart had promised he'd make her death quick if she tried to run. But she was too tired to speak, too tired to fight, too tired to do anything but surrender to the darkness, pulling her down. Her last awareness was Morrison's voice, quiet in the cabin's warmth. "Nobody's going to hurt you again. Not while I'm breathing." Daia. She woke again to daylight and voices. "Told you this was a bad idea." A woman's voice sharp with exasperation. "The whole town's talking. You know what they're saying?" "Don't care what they're saying." Morrison's voice flat and uninterested. "You should care. They're saying you bought her for your bed. They're saying she's your woman now, bought and paid for." "Let them say it." "Gabriel Morrison, you are the most stubborn." Clara opened her eyes. The cabin was small and simply furnished one room with a sleeping area partitioned by a curtain, a cooking area with the stove, a table with 2 chairs. Morning light streamed through a single window, illuminating the woman standing near the door. She was small and dark-haired, wearing a practical wool dress and a thick shawl. Chinese, Clara realized. And angry. "She's awake," Morrison said. The woman turned, her expression shifting from irritation to assessment in a heartbeat. She crossed to the bed and looked down at Clara with dark, intelligent eyes. "I'm Rosie Chen. I run the boarding house in town. Morrison sent for me to check on you." "Clara Bennett," Clara managed. Her voice was stronger today. "Thank you for coming." Rosie bent close, examining Clara's head wound with quick, practiced movements. "Concussion. Bruised ribs. Rope burns on your wrists. You're lucky to be alive." "I don't feel lucky." "You should. Most women who get sold in those auctions don't end up in a warm cabin with a man who respects their virtue." Rosie's gaze cut to Morrison. "Though God knows this fool is making things harder on himself by bringing you here." "I can leave," Clara said. "I don't want to cause trouble for anyone." "You can't leave," Rosie said sharply. "Not yet. You're too weak to travel, and even if you weren't, the Taggart brothers are still in the territory. They don't like losing merchandise." The word merchandise made Clara's stomach turn. "They'll come looking for me." "Maybe. Probably." Rosie straightened, her expression grim. "Lucas Taggart doesn't forget a loss, and his brother Wade is mean enough to track you down out of spite. You're safer here than anywhere else right now." "Because Morrison can protect me." Clara didn't mean for it to sound like a challenge, but it did. Morrison spoke from where he stood near the stove. "Because this cabin is defensible, and I know how to use a rifle. And because Rosie's boarding house is neutral ground, nobody causes trouble there." "Yet," Rosie added, "nobody causes trouble there yet. But harboring a woman who was sold at auction, a woman who belongs—" "She doesn't belong to anyone." Morrison interrupted, his voice hard. "Who was purchased by a half-breed," Rosie continued, ignoring him, "is going to cause talk, and talk leads to trouble." Clara pushed herself up on her elbows, ignoring the way the room tilted. "Then I'll go. I won't stay where I'm not wanted." "I didn't say you weren't wanted." Rosie's expression softened slightly. "I said you'd cause trouble. There's a difference. You can stay here until you're well, and I'll bring you supplies. But you need to understand something, Mrs. Bennett. This town doesn't take kindly to outsiders, especially outsiders who upset their sense of order. And you—" She gestured at Clara, then at Morrison. "The two of you together upset a lot more than order." "I didn't ask for any of this," Clara said. Her throat tightened. "I just wanted to get to my sister." "I know." Rosie's voice gentled. "But wanting doesn't change what is. Right now, what is that you're alive and safe, and in the care of a good man who's going to take heat for helping you. The least you can do is not make his life harder by being foolish." Clara looked at Morrison. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" she asked him. "Really? It can't just be because I was kind to you once." Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then, "When I was 12, my mother died. Cholera. My father had already died, killed in the Indian Wars. I had nowhere to go, so the army took me on as a scout, taught me to track, to fight, to survive. But they never let me forget I was half-Lakota, never let me be one of them. He moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape beyond. After the war, I tried to go back to the Lakota, but I'd been raised white, spoke English better than Lakota. They didn't want me either, so I ended up here breeding horses, keeping to myself. And every day I wake up knowing I don't belong anywhere. He turned back to Clara, and his eyes were fierce. I bought you because I know what it feels like to be unwanted, to be sold and owned and used, and I'll be damned if I stand by and let it happen to someone else when I can stop it. The cabin was silent, except for the crackle of the fire. Rosie sighed. You're going to get yourself killed one of these days, Morrison. Probably, Morrison agreed. And you? Rosie looked at Clara. You need to rest and heal. Don't try to leave until you're strong enough to make it to Cheyenne. And for God's sake, don't do anything stupid like falling in love with your rescuer. That's how these stories always end badly. She swept out before Clara could respond, leaving her alone with Morrison and the weight of everything unsaid. Clara looked at the man who'd bought her freedom, who'd carried her to safety, who'd promised to protect her from his own kind's judgment. I won't cause you trouble, she said finally. I promise. Morrison's mouth quirked, not quite a smile. Too late for that, Mrs. Bennett, but I appreciate the sentiment. He poured more coffee and brought it to her, and this time, when their fingers touched on the cup, Clara didn't flinch away. Outside, the first snow of December began to fall, soft and silent and endless. Chetsaw. The snow fell for 3 days straight. Clara watched it from the cabin window, her forehead pressed against the cold glass. Each flake seemed to bury her deeper into this strange, new life she hadn't asked for. Morrison came and went, feeding his horses, chopping wood, checking the traps he'd set in the forest. He moved through the snow like a ghost, silent and efficient, never complaining about the cold or the work. She tried to help on the 4th day, got as far as the door before her legs gave out. Morrison caught her before she hit the floor, his arm steady around her waist. What are you doing? I can't just lie here, Clara said. Her voice came out sharper than she'd meant. I need to do something, earn my keep. You're recovering from a head wound. I'm not an invalid. Morrison guided her back to the bed, his touch careful. No. But you're hurt, and pushing yourself too hard will make it worse. I've seen soldiers die from doing exactly what you're trying to do right now. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, frustration burning in her chest. I don't want to be a burden. You're not. Morrison crossed to the stove and poured coffee. You want to help keep me company while I work on these saddles. Tell me about Kansas. He brought her the coffee and settled into the chair with a pile of leather and tools. Clara watched his hands move quick and sure, punching holes and threading laces through worn saddle leather. What do you want to know about Kansas? Whatever you want to tell me. Clara sipped her coffee, letting the warmth spread through her. It's flat. So flat you can see weather coming from miles away. Jacob used to say you could watch tomorrow arrive. Your husband? Yes. The word hurt less than it had a month ago. He was a good man, quiet. He made furniture, chairs, tables, bed frames. Beautiful work. People came from 3 counties to buy from him. Morrison's hands stilled. How'd he die? Typhoid, last spring. Clara stared into her cup. It took him in 5 days. I kept thinking he'd fight it off, that he was too strong to die from a fever. But he just kept getting weaker. By the end, he didn't even know who I was. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Clara's throat tightened. Sorry doesn't bring him back. Sorry doesn't pay the debts he left. Sorry doesn't stop his brother from claiming the shop and the house and everything Jacob built. Morrison resumed his work, the leather creaking under his hands. That why you were headed to California? My sister Sarah wrote. Said she had work for me, a place to stay. I sold everything I had left. Jacob's tools, my mother's dishes, even my wedding dress. Got enough for stage fare and $20 to start over with." She laughed bitter. "Didn't even make it halfway." "You'll make it," Morrison said. "When you're well enough, I'll get you to Cheyenne. The train runs regular from there to Sacramento." Clara looked at him. Really looked at him. The scar on his face caught the firelight. His hands moved with practiced ease over the leather. There was something peaceful about him. Something settled, even though Rosie had said he didn't belong anywhere. "Why horses?" she asked. Morrison glanced up, surprised. "What? You breed horses. Why horses and not cattle? Cattle would be more profitable." A smile ghosted across his face there, and gone so quick she almost missed it. "Horses are honest. They don't lie about who they are or what they want. You treat them right, they'll die for you. Treat them wrong, they'll kill you. Simple. Not like people. No, not like people." They sat in companionable silence, Morrison working, Clara watching. Outside, the snow kept falling. That night, Clara woke to voices. Men's voices, rough and angry, coming from outside the cabin. She sat up too fast, and the room spun, but she pushed through it, reaching for the shawl Rosie had brought. Morrison was already at the window, rifle in hand. He didn't look at her. "Stay away from the glass." "Who is it?" "Can't tell yet." Clara moved to the wall beside the window, her heart hammering. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see torches in the darkness. 3, maybe 4 men on horseback. "Morrison." One of the voices carried through the wind. "We know you got that woman in there." Morrison's jaw tightened. He checked his rifle, then set it aside and opened the door. Cold air rushed in, carrying snow and the smell of torch smoke. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Morrison's voice was level, polite even. "You can hand over the woman you stole from that auction." Clara's blood went cold. She moved closer to the door, close enough to see the men in the torchlight. The one speaking sat his horse like he owned the world. Lucas Taggart. She recognized his voice, would recognize it in her nightmares for the rest of her life. "I didn't steal anything," Morrison said. "I paid a fair price." "You paid for something that wasn't his to sell." Lucas walked his horse closer. "That woman killed my brother. Shot him while we were traveling peaceful-like. We were bringing her to justice when that auctioneer took it upon himself to make a profit." "That's a lie," Clara said. The words were out before she could stop them. Morrison shot her a warning look, but it was too late. Lucas leaned forward in his saddle, peering into the cabin. "There she is. The murderess herself." His smile was pure meanness. "You going to let her speak for you, Morrison? Or are you man enough to handle your own business?" "She stays here," Morrison said. "Whatever you think happened, you can take it up with Sheriff Whitmore when he comes through next week. Whitmore don't care about dead Confederates. You know that." Lucas's voice hardened. "Last chance, Morrison. Send her out or we come in and get her." Morrison's hand moved to his hip, resting on his holstered Colt. "You're welcome to try." The silence that followed was thick with threat. Clara could see the calculation in Lucas's eyes, weighing the odds. 4 men against 1. But Morrison stood in the doorway like a wall, and something about his stillness must have given Lucas pause. "This ain't over," Lucas said finally. "That woman's mine by rights, and I mean to have her. If not tonight, then soon." He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. Their torches disappeared into the snow like dying stars. Morrison stood in the doorway for a long moment after they'd gone. Then he closed the door and barred it, checking the latch twice. "They'll be back," Clara said. Her voice shook. "He's not going to let this go." "I know." Morrison moved through the cabin, checking the windows, the back door, every possible entry point. "But we've got time. They won't try anything tonight, not in this snow." "I should leave. This isn't your fight." Morrison stopped, turning to face her. "Yes, it is." "Why?" "Because I mended your saddlebags once, that's not worth dying for." Maybe not. Morrison crossed to where she stood, and his eyes were fierce in the firelight. But standing by while evil men hurt innocent people, that's worth dying for. That's what separates us from animals. Clara's throat tightened. I'm not innocent. I did kill Wade Taggart. Lucas wasn't lying about that. Morrison went very still. Tell me. So she did. Told him about the stagecoach attack, about Wade's hands on her, while his brother held her down, about the driver's gun lying in the dirt just out of reach. Told him how she'd fought and screamed and finally gotten her hands on that gun, how Wade's face had looked when she pulled the trigger, how his blood had felt hot on her hands. I killed him, she finished. Her voice was hollow. Shot him point blank while he was trying to... She couldn't finish the sentence. Morrison's expression hadn't changed. You defended yourself. I took a life. You saved your own. He moved closer, and his voice was gentle. That's not murder, Mrs. Bennett. That's survival. And any law worth the name would see it that way. Lucas won't. No, he won't. Morrison returned to the window, watching the darkness. But Lucas Taggart isn't the law, and he's not taking you, not while I'm breathing. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was being foolish, risking his life for a woman he barely knew. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself asking, Why do you care so much? Morrison didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. I told you about my mother dying, about not belonging anywhere, but I didn't tell you about the year I spent in a reservation school after the army let me go. He turned from the window, his face half in shadow. They beat the Lakota out of us. Beat us for speaking our language, for praying to our gods, for being what we were born to be. And the whole time they told us it was for our own good, that they were civilizing us, saving us. His hands clenched. I learned then that the worst cruelty is the kind people convince themselves is righteous. Lucas thinks he's righteous, Clara said softly. Lucas thinks he owns you. That because his brother tried to rape you and you fought back, you owe him something. That's the same thinking that lets men buy women at auctions and call it legal. The same thinking that lets them beat children and call it education. The same thinking that lets them steal land and call it civilization. Morrison's voice was hard, now edged with old anger. So yes, Mrs. Bennett, I care. I care because the day I stop caring is the day I become like them. And I'd rather die than become like them. Clara stood there, this widow from Kansas who'd killed a man and been sold like cattle, and looked at this half-breed cowboy who'd bought her freedom and refused to let evil win. Something shifted in her chest, something that felt dangerous and necessary all at once. Clara, she said. Morrison blinked. Ma'am? My name is Clara, not Mrs. Bennett, just Clara. A slow smile crossed Morrison's face, transforming it. Gabriel, though most people call me Gabe. Gabriel, Clara repeated. It felt important using his name, made him real instead of just her rescuer. Thank you, for everything. Don't thank me yet. Gabe moved back to his chair, picking up the rifle. We've got a long night ahead of us and probably worse to come, but we'll face it. Together. Clara settled back onto the bed, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell, and somewhere in the darkness, Lucas Taggart was planning his next move. But inside the cabin, with the fire burning and Gabriel Morrison keeping watch, Clara felt something she hadn't felt since Jacob died. She felt safe. The next morning brought Rosie riding through knee-deep snow on a mule that looked as sour about the weather as she did. She knocked snow off her boots and unwrapped the scarf from her face. The whole town's talking, she announced, setting a basket on the table. Lucas Taggart rode in at dawn, claiming Morrison stole his property and threatened him with violence. I didn't threaten him, Gabe said. He was frying bacon on the stove, the smell filling the cabin. I just made it clear she wasn't leaving. Same thing in his mind. Rosie pulled food from the basket. Bread, cheese, dried apples. Sheriff Whitmore arrived this morning. He's asking questions. Clara's stomach dropped. Will he arrest me? Rosie's expression was unreadable. Depends on what he believes. Lucas is claiming you murdered his brother in cold blood. Says they were escorting you to justice for stealing from a homestead in Cheyenne when you shot Wade and ran. That's a lie, Clara said fiercely. They attacked the coach, killed the driver and an old preacher. Wade tried to... She stopped the words catching in her throat. I know. Rosie said, her voice surprisingly gentle. I know what men like the Taggarts do. But knowing and proving are different things. You have any witnesses? They're all dead. Then it's your word against his. Rosie looked at Gabe. And yours if you're fool enough to speak for her. I am, Gabe said. Rosie sighed. Of course you are. Well, then you'd better come to town. Both of you. Whitmore wants to hear Clara's side, and hiding out here makes you look guilty. Clara's hands were shaking. What if he doesn't believe me? What if he arrests me? Then we fight it in court, Rosie said. Cheyenne's got a proper judge and he's a fair man. But you have to face this, Clara. Running won't solve anything. Gabe plated the bacon and brought it to the table. Eat first, then we'll go. They ate in silence, the weight of what was coming pressing down on them. Clara couldn't taste the food, couldn't think about anything except Lucas Taggart's cold smile and the feel of his brother's blood on her hands. After breakfast, Gabe saddled 2 horses. He helped Clara onto a gentle mare, then swung onto his chestnut stallion. Rosie led the way on her mule, and they rode through the snow toward Sweetwater Station. The town looked different in daylight, bigger than Clara had realized, with maybe 40 buildings lining the main street. People stopped to stare as they passed. Women pulled their children close. Men's faces hardened with judgment. Don't look at them, Gabe murmured. Keep your head up. Rosie led them to a building at the far end of town. A sign above the door read, Sheriff. Inside, a man sat behind a desk writing in a ledger. He looked up when they entered. Sheriff Augustus Whitmore was maybe 60, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. He studied Clara for a long moment, then gestured to a chair. Mrs. Bennett, have a seat. Clara sat. Gabe stood behind her, his hand resting lightly on the back of her chair. The gesture felt protective and possessive at once. Lucas Taggart filed a complaint against you this morning, Whitmore said. His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. Says you murdered his brother Wade. Says they were escorting you to the law when you shot him and ran. That true? No, sir, Clara said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. The Taggart brothers attacked the stagecoach I was traveling on. They killed the driver Samuel Hayes and an old preacher named Reverend Thomas. They tried to... She swallowed hard. Wade Taggart tried to force himself on me. I fought back, got hold of the driver's gun and shot him. Whitmore's expression didn't change. Any witnesses to this? They're all dead. Lucas killed them. So it's your word against his? Yes, sir. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, studying her. You know how this looks. Widow woman traveling alone shoots a man and claims self-defense. No witnesses, no proof, just your story. It's the truth, Clara said. Maybe so, but truth and proof ain't always the same thing. Whitmore shifted his gaze to Gabe. And you, Morrison. Lucas says you threatened him last night. Says you pulled a gun on him when he came to reclaim his property. She's not property, Gabe said. His voice was hard. And I didn't pull my gun. Just made it clear I'd use it if he tried to take her by force. That's threatening in most people's book. Not in mine. In my book, it's called protecting an innocent woman from a man who means her harm. Whitmore's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You always this righteous Morrison. Only when it matters. The sheriff was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming on the desk. Then he looked at Clara again. Tell me about the stagecoach attack. Every detail you remember. so Clara told him. About leaving Cheyenne, about the Taggart brothers appearing on the road, about the gunfire and the blood and the terror. She told him about Wade's weight on top of her, about Lucas holding her down, about the driver's gun just inches from her reaching hand. She told him everything, even the parts that made her voice shake and her hands tremble. When she finished, Whitmore was quiet for a long time. Outside, voices drifted through the window. Men arguing, women gossiping, the everyday sounds of a frontier town going about its business. Finally, Whitmore spoke. "I believe you." Clara's breath left her in a rush. "You do?" "I do. I've known the Taggart brothers for 3 years now. They're bad men, the both of them. Well, Wade was. Lucas still is. Confederate trash that didn't know when the war was over. They've been suspected in 6 robberies and 2 murders, but nobody could prove anything, until now." "So, you'll arrest Lucas?" Gabe asked. Whitmore's expression turned grim. "On what charge? Wade's dead, so I can't arrest him. And I got no proof Lucas killed anybody. Just Mrs. Bennett's word, and like I said, that ain't the same as proof." "Then what happens to Clara?" Gabe's voice was tight with frustration. "She stays free. Self-defense is legal, even if you can't prove the attack. But—" Whitmore held up a hand when Gabe started to speak. "But Lucas ain't going to let this go. He's claiming she's his property bought and paid for at that auction. Says Morrison stole her." "That auction was illegal," Rosie cut in. She'd been silent until now, standing by the door. "Selling human beings is illegal. Has been for 13 years. In the eyes of the law, yes," Whitmore agreed. "But out here, law's whatever we make it, and a lot of people in this town see that auction as legitimate business. They ain't going to take kindly to Morrison interfering." "So what are you saying?" Clara asked. Fear was rising in her chest again, cold and familiar. Whitmore stood moving to the window. "I'm saying you're in a dangerous position, Mrs. Bennett. Lucas wants you back, and he's got friends in this town who'll help him get you. The fact that Morrison bought you don't mean much to folks who already don't like him." "Because he's half-Lakota," Gabe said flatly. "Because he's different. Because he keeps to himself and doesn't bow to the town fathers." Whitmore turned from the window. "You made enemies when you bought her, Morrison. Men who've been looking for an excuse to run you out. This gives them that excuse. Let them try. They will. And they'll use the law to do it. Or their version of it." Whitmore returned to his desk. "My advice, get Mrs. Bennett out of the territory. Soon as the snow clears, put her on a train to California. Let this blow over." "I'm not running her out of town," Gabe said. "She hasn't done anything wrong." "Hasn't done anything wrong and being in the right aren't protection out here. You know that." Whitmore's voice softened. "I like you, Morrison. You're a good man. But you're one man against a town that wants you gone. Don't make this fight. It's not one you can win." Clara looked at Gabe, saw the set of his jaw, the steel in his eyes. He was going to fight anyway. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. "Thank you for your time, Sheriff," she said, standing. "We'll think about what you said." Outside, the snow had started again, soft and relentless. They mounted their horses in silence. Rosie rode close, her expression troubled. "He's right, you know," she said quietly. "This town will eat you alive if you're not careful." "I've been eaten by worse," Gabe said. They rode back to the cabin through the gathering storm, and Clara thought about Sheriff Whitmore's words, about truth and proof, and how little difference they made when people had already decided what they wanted to believe, about how she'd escaped one hell only to find herself in another, dragging a good man down with her. That night, lying in the darkness while Gabe kept watch by the window, Clara made a decision. She would leave, would take his offer of train fare and go to California like she'd planned. Would stop being a burden to this man who'd shown her more kindness than she deserved. But when she opened her mouth to tell him, the words that came out were different. "Gabriel." "Yes." "I'm afraid." A pause. Then, "So am I." His honesty surprised her. She'd expected reassurance, empty promises that everything would be fine. Instead, he gave her the truth. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "Whatever we have to." His voice was quiet in the darkness. "Together." And Clara realized with a start that she believed him. The attack came on the 7th night. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and Gabe's hand over her mouth. His eyes were wide in the darkness, urgent but calm. "Don't scream," he whispered. "Get dressed, quickly." She nodded and he removed his hand. Her fingers fumbled with the borrowed clothes, men's pants, and a heavy shirt easier to move in than a dress. Through the window she could see orange light flickering. Fire. "They're burning the barn," Gabe said. He was checking his rifle, loading his Colt, his movements quick and practiced. "Trying to draw me out or smoke us out. Either way, we need to leave." "How many?" "At least 6, maybe more." He pulled on his coat and thrust another at her. "We're going out the back. There's a trail that leads up into the rocks. It's steep, but the horses can make it." "What about your home? Your horses?" Gabe's jaw tightened. "Already lost. Now move." They slipped out the back door into the bitter cold. The barn was fully ablaze now, flames reaching toward the black sky. Gabe's horses screamed inside, trapped. Clara started toward them, but Gabe caught her arm. "They're gone," he said, his voice rough with grief. "We can't save them." "Gabriel." "Now, Clara." He pulled her toward the corral, where he'd already saddled 2 horses, his chestnut stallion and the gentle mare. They mounted, and Gabe led them away from the burning barn, away from the cabin that had been her sanctuary, toward the dark mass of rocks and trees beyond. Behind them, men's voices rose in triumph. Clara heard Lucas Taggart shouting orders, heard the crash as the barn roof collapsed, heard the terrible silence that followed the horses screaming. Gabe didn't look back. His face was stone in the firelight, all hard angles and controlled fury. They rode hard into the darkness, the horses picking their way up the steep trail with the sure-footedness of animals who knew this path. Snow began to fall again, heavy and thick, covering their tracks almost as fast as they made them. They rode for what felt like hours. Clara's hands went numb on the reins. Her face burned with cold. The head wound throbbed with every jolt, sending waves of nausea through her. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop. Behind them, more fires bloomed the cabin, she realized. They were burning everything Gabe owned. Finally, as the first gray light of dawn touched the sky, Gabe pulled his horse to a stop. They'd reached a narrow canyon, its walls rising steep on either side. At the far end, Clara could make out the shape of a small structure. "Line cabin," Gabe said. "Used it when I was breaking horses up here. It's rough, but it's shelter." They dismounted and led the horses inside. The cabin was barely more than a shed. One room with a dirt floor. No windows, just a door and some gaps in the walls where the wind whistled through. But it was out of the snow and out of sight. Gabe unsaddled the horses with quick, efficient movements. His hands were shaking. Clara watched him work, saw the way his shoulders were tight with suppressed emotion, saw the muscle jumping in his jaw. "Gabriel," she said softly. He didn't respond, just kept working, checking the horses' legs, their hooves making sure they were sound. "Gabriel, I'm sorry. This is my fault. Your home, your horses, everything. Don't." His voice was harsh. "Don't apologize for other men's evil. But if I hadn't been there..." He turned on her, then his eyes blazing. "If you hadn't been there, you'd be dead or worse. Lucas Taggart would have hunted you down and killed you, or sold you to someone who'd use you until there was nothing left. So yes, I lost my home. Lost my horses. Lost everything I built over 6 years. But you're alive, and that matters more." Clara's throat closed. Why does it matter more?" Gabe stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned away, running a hand through his hair. "Because it does. That's all." But Clara knew. She'd known since that night in the cabin when he'd admitted he was afraid too. Known since he'd stood between her and Lucas Taggart, willing to die to keep her safe. Known since he'd looked at her like she was worth saving. "We can't keep running," she said. "They'll follow us, hunt us down." "I know." "So what do we do?" Gabe moved to the door, looking out at the snow-covered canyon. "We survive today. Tomorrow, we figure out the rest." They spent the day in the line cabin, taking turns keeping watch while the other rested. The horses stood close together for warmth. Clara tried to sleep but couldn't. Every sound made her jump: wind in the trees, snow sliding off rocks, the distant call of a hawk. When night fell again, Gabe built a small fire in the corner, using dried wood he found stacked against the wall. The smoke drifted up through the gaps in the roof. They huddled close to the flames, sharing jerky and hardtack from Gabe's saddlebags. "Tell me about your horses," Clara said. She needed to hear him talk, needed to fill the silence with something other than her own thoughts. Gabe was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I had 8. The chestnut here, his name's Thunder. Raised him from a colt. The others—" His voice caught. "The others were Mustangs I'd gentled. Took months with each one. They trusted me. I'm so sorry. They died afraid. Trapped." Gabe's hands clenched. "That's what I can't forgive. Not the cabin, not my things. But those horses trusted me to keep them safe, and I failed them." Clara reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold and rough with calluses. "You didn't fail them. Lucas Taggart killed them. He's responsible, not you." Gabe's fingers tightened around hers. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Stay kind. After everything that's happened to you, losing your husband, being attacked, sold, hunted, how do you stay kind?" Clara thought about it. About Jacob dying in her arms, about Wade Taggart's weight on her, about standing on that auction block with blood running down her face, about all the ways the world had tried to break her. "Because the alternative is becoming like them," she said finally, "and I won't give them that. Won't let them turn me into something cruel and hard. Jacob taught me that. He said the measure of a person isn't what happens to them, but how they respond to it." "Your Jacob sounds like a good man." He was. Clara looked at Gabe's profile in the firelight, at the strong lines of his face, the scar that marked him. "But so are you." Gabe turned to her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Clara?" A sound outside cut him off. Horses. Men's voices carrying through the darkness. Gabe was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. He moved to the door, peering through the gaps in the wood. Clara joined him, her heart hammering. Through the falling snow, she could see torches. 3, maybe 4. The riders were still distant, moving slowly through the canyon, searching. "They tracked us," Gabe said quietly. "Must have followed before the snow covered our trail completely." "What do we do?" Gabe looked around the cabin. 1 room, 1 door. No windows, no back exit. "We're trapped," Clara whispered. "No." Gabe moved quickly, throwing his saddle back on Thunder. "You're going to ride out. There's a path behind this cabin, narrow and steep, but Thunder can handle it. It leads to the main trail about a mile north. Follow it east until you reach Wilson Creek, then north to the Wilson Ranch. They're good people. They'll help you." Clara stared at him. "What about you?" "I'll hold them here. Give you time to get away." "No!" The word came out fierce. "I'm not leaving you to die." "Clara." "No." She grabbed his arm. "We stay together. We fight together. Or we die together. But I'm not running anymore." Gabe's eyes searched her face. "You're hurt. You can barely ride. If you stay, then I stay. That's my choice." For a moment, Clara thought he'd argue, thought he'd physically put her on that horse and send her away. But instead he nodded once, sharp and decisive. "All right, then we make a stand." He moved to his saddlebags, pulling out ammunition, a second revolver, a knife. "You know how to shoot?" Jacob taught me. I'm not great, but I can hit what I aim at. Good enough. He handed her the revolver, checked that it was loaded. They'll try to talk us out first. Offer terms. Don't believe anything Lucas Taggart says. He wants you dead and me humiliated. That's all he wants. Clara checked the gun, her hands steadier than she'd expected. How many bullets? 6 in the pistol, another 12 in my pocket. Gabe positioned himself by the door, rifle ready. Not much for a fight, but it'll have to do. The riders were closer now. Clara could make out individual shapes in the torchlight. 5 men. Lucas Taggart in the lead, sitting his horse like he was leading a cavalry charge. They stopped about 30 yards from the cabin. Lucas raised his torch high. Morrison, I know you're in there. Gabe didn't answer. You got nowhere to run, Breed. We burned your place, killed your horses, and now we got you cornered like the animal you are. Lucas's voice was full of triumph. Send out the woman, and maybe I'll let you live. What do I do? Clara whispered. Stay quiet. Stay low. You hear me, Morrison. Send her out. Still Gabe said nothing. Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, could hear his breathing slow and controlled. Lucas's voice changed, became harder. Fine. We'll do this the hard way. Boys, light it up. 2 of the men dismounted carrying torches. They moved toward the cabin. Gabe fired. The first man went down with a scream, clutching his leg. The second dropped his torch and ran back to his horse. That's your warning, Gabe called out. Next one comes closer. I aim for the chest. You just signed your death warrant, Lucas roared. Kill them both! Gunfire erupted. Bullets slammed into the cabin walls, punching through the thin wood. Clara pressed herself against the floor, her hands over her head. Splinters rained down. The horses screamed and stamped, eyes rolling with fear. Gabe fired twice more quick and precise. Another man cried out. The gunfire paused. 4 bullets left, Gabe said quietly. Make them count. Clara crawled to the wall, found a gap where a bullet had torn through. She could see Lucas still mounted, directing his men. 3 left standing, plus the one Gabe had shot in the leg. They're going to rush us, she said. I know. Gabriel, I need you to know something. Clara's voice was steady, despite the terror coursing through her. If we die here, I need you to know that these last days with you have been the best days I've had since Jacob died. You made me feel human again, made me feel worth saving. So thank you. Gabe looked at her, and his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. Clara. Morrison. Lucas's voice cut through the darkness. Last chance. Send her out and you can ride away. I swear it on my brother's grave. Gabe's laugh was harsh. Your brother didn't deserve a grave, and your word's worth less than dirt. Clara Bennett stays with me. Then you both die. Lucas spurred his horse forward, and his men followed. Gabe fired. 1 man fell. Fired again. Missed. The riders were too close, moving too fast. They hit the cabin door like a wave, and it exploded inward under the impact. The first man through died before he could raise his gun, Gabe's knife in his throat. Rusta. The second got off a shot that went wide, and Clara fired her revolver, catching him in the shoulder. He staggered back, screaming. Then Lucas was there, his face twisted with rage, swinging his rifle like a club. It caught Gabe across the temple, and he went down hard. Clara screamed and fired again, but Lucas dodged, and the bullet buried itself in the wall. Lucas grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. Finally. Been waiting for this. Clara drove her elbow into his stomach with everything she had. Lucas grunted and loosened his grip just enough for her to spin, bringing the gun up. But he was faster, knocking it from her hand. It skittered across the floor. They grappled, Lucas trying to pin her arms, Clara fighting with teeth and nails and rage. She could hear Gabe groaning, trying to get up, could hear more men entering the cabin. Hold her down, Lucas shouted. Hands grabbed Clara's arms, her legs. She bucked and twisted, but there were too many of them. They forced her to the ground, face pressed against the cold dirt. Lucas knelt beside her, breathing hard. "You killed my brother," he said. His voice was almost conversational. "Shot him while he was unarmed. Now I'm going to return the favor." He cocked his pistol and pressed it against the back of her head. Clara closed her eyes. Thought of Jacob. Thought of Sarah, who'd never know what happened to her. Thought of Gabriel Morrison, who'd tried to save her and paid for it with everything. "Do it," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "Get it over with." "Oh, I will. But first you're going to watch your breed die." Lucas grabbed her hair again, forcing her head up. Through the tangle of her hair, Clara could see Gabe on his knees, blood running down his face, two men holding him. Lucas stood and walked over to him. "Any last words, Morrison?" Gabe looked past Lucas, his eyes finding Clara's. "I'm sorry," he said. "Sorry I couldn't protect you." "You did," Clara choked out. "You did protect me. You gave me back my life." Lucas raised his gun, aiming at Gabe's head. How touching. "Now die." The gunshot was deafening in the small space, but Lucas didn't fire. Instead, he stood frozen, a strange expression on his face. Then, he looked down at his chest where blood was spreading across his shirt. He dropped his gun and fell to his knees. Behind him in the doorway stood Sheriff Whitmore. His rifle was still raised, smoke drifting from the barrel. Behind him, more men, deputy citizens, Rosie Chen, holding a torch high. "That's enough," Whitmore said. His voice was cold as the snow outside. "Let them go." The men holding Gabe released him. He collapsed forward, catching himself on his hands. The men holding Clara scrambled away, hands raised. Whitmore walked into the cabin, his rifle never wavering. He looked down at Lucas, who was gasping like a landed fish. "Lucas Taggart, you're under arrest for attempted murder, arson, and being a general pain in my ass. Your friend's here too." He gestured to his deputies. "Get them out of here." As the deputies moved in, Whitmore knelt beside Clara. "You all right, Mrs. Bennett?" Clara couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at Lucas Taggart's blood seeping into the dirt. Whitmore helped her sit up, his rough hands surprisingly gentle. "How did you know?" she finally managed. "Rosie." Whitmore nodded toward the doorway where Rosie stood. "She saw them ride out armed and angry. Came and got me. We've been tracking them all night." Rosie pushed her way inside, her face tight with worry. "Clara Gabriel." "Here," Gabe said. He was trying to stand, failing. Rosie went to him, helped him up. "You're both alive," she said. It sounded like a prayer. "Thank God you're both alive." Clara started to laugh. Couldn't help it. Hysteria bubbled up from somewhere deep inside, spilling out in gasps and giggles. She'd been ready to die, had accepted it, and now she was alive, and Lucas Taggart was bleeding on the floor, and Sheriff Whitmore was arresting the men who'd tried to kill them. "Clara!" Gabe was beside her suddenly, his hands on her face. "Clara, look at me." She focused on his eyes, those dark, impossible eyes that had seen her at her worst and stayed anyway. "We're alive," she said. "Yes. You're bleeding. So are you." They stared at each other, and Clara felt something crack open in her chest. All the fear and grief and rage she'd been holding back for months came pouring out. She buried her face in Gabe's chest and sobbed great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. His arms came around her, holding her tight, and she felt him shaking too. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "I've got you." Outside, the snow kept falling. Lucas Taggart died on the floor of the line cabin, his blood mixing with the dirt and ash. His men were bound and led away by Whitmore's deputies, their faces pale with shock. Rosie brought blankets, water, medical supplies. She cleaned Gabe's head wound, while Clara sat wrapped in wool, watching with dull eyes. Everything felt distant, unreal, like she was watching it happen to someone else. "You need to come back to town," Whitmore said. He stood in the doorway, his face tired. "Both of you, give formal statements. Get proper medical attention." "Will they be safe there?" Rosie asked sharply. After this, Whitmore was quiet for a moment. Lucas had friends, people who'll see this as murder, not justice. But he also had enemies, people who've been waiting years for someone to stand up to him. He looked at Gabe. You made that stand, Morrison. Whether you wanted to or not, you're a symbol now. I just wanted to save her, Gabe said. Well, you did, and in doing so, you might have saved this whole damn town from itself. Whitmore held out his hand. Come on, let's get you home. Gabe took his hand and pulled himself up. Then he reached for Clara, and together they walked out of the line cabin into the gray dawn light. The snow had stopped. The world looked clean and new, like it had been washed clean of all the blood and violence. But Clara knew better. Knew the stains went deeper than snow could cover. Knew she'd carry the weight of this night for the rest of her life. Still, she was alive, and Gabriel Morrison was beside her, his hand warm in hers. And for now, in this moment, that was enough. They rode back to Sweetwater Station in silence, Gabe and Clara sharing thunder, while Rosie led the way on her mule. The deputies followed behind with the prisoners, their horses' hooves muffled by fresh snow. Clara sat in front of Gabe, his arms around her as he held the reins, and she could feel him trembling. Not from cold, from exhaustion and pain and relief so profound it felt like breaking. The town was awake when they arrived despite the early hour. Word had spread fast the way it always did in small places. People lined the street watching in silence as Sheriff Whitmore led them to Rosie's boarding house. Their faces held a mixture of emotions Clara couldn't read. Some looked angry, others curious. A few wore expressions that might have been respect. Rosie dismounted and pushed through the small crowd that had gathered at her door. Move. These people need rest and privacy, not your gawking. Is it true? A woman called out. Did Morrison kill Lucas Taggart? Whitmore killed him, Rosie said sharply. Legal as breathing. Now get out of my way. She held the door open while Gabe helped Clara dismount. Clara's legs barely held her. Gabe caught her waist, steadying her, and together they climbed the steps into the boarding house. Inside was warm and clean and blessedly quiet. Rosie led them to a room on the second floor, spacious, with a real bed and curtains on the windows. Clara sank into a chair while Rosie lit lamps and stoked the fire. Doctor's coming, Rosie said. You both need proper tending. Gabe, that head wound needs stitches. Clara, you look like death warmed over. Feel like it too, Clara murmured. Gabe stood by the window looking down at the street. His shoulders were rigid, his jaw tight. Clara watched him, saw the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Gabriel, she said softly. He didn't turn. I killed a man tonight. Shot him in cold blood. You were defending yourself. Defending me. Still killed him. His voice was hollow. Still took a life. Clara stood, ignoring the way the room tilted. She crossed to him and put her hand on his arm. You saved my life. You saved both our lives. That's what matters. Does it? Gabe turned to face her, and his eyes were haunted. That man had a family, maybe a wife, children, and I killed him. That man was trying to kill you, Rosie said from across the room. Her voice was sharp. Was trying to kill Clara. You think his family would rather he succeeded, would rather you both died so he could go home? No, but nothing. Rosie crossed her arms. You did what you had to do, what any decent man would do. Now stop torturing yourself, and let the doctor look at that wound before you bleed all over my clean floor. A knock at the door interrupted them. Rosie answered it, admitting a thin man in his 50s carrying a medical bag. Dr. Harrison, she called him. He looked at Gabe's head wound and whistled low. That's going to need at least 10 stitches. Sit down, Morrison. Gabe sat. The doctor worked quickly, cleaning the wound and threading a curved needle. Clara watched Gabe's face as the needle pierced his skin, pulling the torn flesh together. He didn't flinch. Didn't make a sound. just stared straight ahead, his jaw locked. When the doctor finished with Gabe, he turned to Clara. "Your turn, Mrs. Bennett. Let's see that temple." The old wound had reopened during the fight. Dr. Harrison cleaned it gently, his touch professional and impersonal. "This should have been stitched when it first happened. It's healing badly. You'll have a scar." "I don't care about scars," Clara said. She was looking at Gabe at the fresh line of black thread marching across his scalp. "Scars mean you survived." The doctor finished his work and left instructions with Rosie about changing bandages and watching for infection. After he left, Rosie brought food, hot soup and fresh bread that Clara could barely taste. She ate because Rosie insisted, not because she was hungry. "You should sleep," Rosie said when they'd finished. "Both of you. I'll wake you if Whitmore needs statements." "I can't sleep," Clara said. It was true. Her body was exhausted, but her mind kept racing, replaying the fight, the gunshots, Lucas Taggart's face as he died. "Try anyway." Rosie looked at Gabe. "You staying?" "If Clara wants me to." Clara nodded. She didn't want to be alone. Didn't think she could bear it. Rosie left, closing the door softly behind her. Gabe moved to the chair by the fire while Clara lay on the bed fully clothed. She stared at the ceiling, counting her heartbeats, trying to will herself to sleep. "Thank you," she said after a while. "For everything. For buying me, for protecting me, for almost dying for me. I know I keep saying it, but I don't know what else to say." "You don't have to thank me," Gabe said. His voice was tired. "I did what anyone should do." "But most wouldn't. Most people would have walked away. Would have let Lucas take me. I'm not most people. No." Clara turned on her side to look at him. The firelight caught the planes of his face, the fresh bandage white against his dark hair. "You're not." They were quiet for a long time. Clara felt herself drifting, pulled down by exhaustion despite her racing thoughts. Just before sleep claimed her, she heard Gabe's voice so quiet, she almost missed it. "I'm glad you're alive, Clara Bennett." She wanted to respond, wanted to tell him she was glad he was alive too, that he meant more to her than she had words for. But sleep dragged her under before she could form the words. She woke to voices, angry voices coming from downstairs. Clara sat up too quickly, and the room spun. Gabe was at the window again, looking down at the street. His hand rested on his holstered Colt. "What's happening?" Clara asked. "Town meeting. About us." Gabe's voice was flat. "They're deciding what to do." Clara joined him at the window. A crowd had gathered in front of the boarding house, maybe 40 people. She could see Sheriff Whitmore standing on the steps, his hands raised for quiet. "They want me gone," Gabe said. "Want me run out of the territory for killing one of their own?" Lucas Taggart wasn't one of their own. He was a criminal. He was white. That's all that matters to some people. Clara's hands clenched. "Then they're fools." A small smile touched Gabe's mouth there and gone. "Maybe. But they're fools with guns and numbers. That's a dangerous combination." Below, Whitmore was speaking. His voice carried through the cold air, sharp with authority. "Lucas Taggart broke the law, repeatedly. He and his brother terrorized this territory for 3 years, and we all knew it. We just didn't have the spine to stop him. Morrison killed him," someone shouted. "Killed him and burned down his own place to cover it up." "That's a damn lie," Whitmore shot back. "I was there. I saw Lucas Taggart and his men attack Morrison's cabin. Saw them hunt Morrison and Mrs. Bennett like animals. And I shot Lucas Taggart myself when he tried to execute an innocent woman." The crowd murmured, uncertain. "Mrs. Bennett killed Wade Taggart," another voice called. "She's a murderer. She defended herself against rape." Whitmore set his voice hard. "Any one of you would do the same if it was your wife, your daughter, your sister. Wade Taggart got what he deserved. So now we're letting breeds and murderers walk free in our town." Whitmore's expression turned dangerous. Morrison isn't a breed. He's a man who risked everything to save a woman he barely knew. And Mrs. Bennett isn't a murderer. She's a widow who defended her honor with the only means available. If you can't see that, if you can't see the difference between justice and evil, then this town is already lost." Silence fell. Clara held her breath, waiting. Then a new voice spoke up, a woman's voice. "Sheriff's right. Lucas Taggart was poison. Good riddance to him." "Amen to that," another voice agreed. "I lost stock to the Taggart brothers last spring. Nobody did nothing about it then?" "That's different." "How?" The woman again. "How is it different?" "Because Morrison's got Lakota blood. My husband served with Morrison in the cavalry. Said he was the best scout they had. Saved his life twice." More voices joined in, some agreeing with the woman, others arguing. The crowd was splitting, Clara realized. Not everyone wanted them gone. Gabe's hand found hers, his fingers rough and warm. "Might work out after all," he said quietly. Below, Whitmore raised his hands again. "Here's what's going to happen. Morrison and Mrs. Bennett stay. They've broken no laws and they're under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me, personally." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. The crowd shifted uneasy, but no one challenged him. "Now go home," Whitmore said. "All of you. Show's over." Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd dispersed. Clara watched them go, saw the angry looks some cast toward the boarding house, saw others nodding as they walked away. It wasn't universal acceptance, but it was enough, for now. Gabe released her hand and moved away from the window. "We should leave anyway. Head to Cheyenne, get you on that train to California." "Is that what you want?" Clara asked. "For me to leave." Gabe was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "I want you to be safe. Want you to have the life you planned. Your sister teaching a fresh start away from all this violence." "That's not what I asked." He turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression made her breath catch. "No, it's not what I want. But what I want doesn't matter. You've already lost too much because of me." "Because of Lucas Taggart," Clara corrected. "Not because of you. You've given me nothing but kindness and protection and—" She stopped the words, catching in her throat. "And what?" "And hope." Clara's voice shook. "You gave me hope when I thought I had none left. Made me believe life could be good again. That I could be more than just a grieving widow running from her past." Gabe crossed to her, his eyes searching her face. "Clara, I don't want to go to California," she said. The words rushed out, desperate and true. "I don't want to teach in some school where nobody knows me. I don't want to start over somewhere safe and civilized and empty of everything that matters." "What do you want?" Clara reached up and touched the bandage on his head, her fingers gentle. "I want to stay here, with you, if you'll have me." "Have you?" Gabe's laugh was shaky. "Clara, I'm a half-breed horse breeder with no home, no horses, and a town full of people who want me gone. I can't offer you anything. Can't give you the life you deserve. You can give me yourself. That's all I want. I'm not enough. You're everything." Clara's voice was fierce now. "You're kind and brave and honorable. You treat me like I'm worth something, like my thoughts and choices matter. You make me feel alive. How is that not enough?" Gabe stared at her, and she watched emotions flicker across his face. Hope, fear, longing, doubt. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I loved someone once, before the war. She died while I was fighting. I swore I'd never love like that again, never give anyone that power to destroy me." "I'm not asking for your love," Clara said, though the words cost her. "I'm just asking for a chance. To see if maybe we can build something together. Something good out of all this pain." "You're asking for more than that." Gabe's hand came up to cup her cheek. "You're asking me to believe again, to hope. That's harder than loving." "I know." Clara leaned into his touch. "I'm asking the same thing of myself." For a long moment they stood there, caught between fear and possibility. Then Gabe leaned down and kissed her, gentle and careful, like she was something precious that might break. Clara's eyes closed, and she kissed him back, pouring everything she couldn't say into that kiss. Her gratitude, her grief, her desperate hope for a future she'd thought was lost. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Gabe rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said. "Please stay." "Yes," Clara whispered. "Yes." A knock at the door made them step apart. Rosie entered without waiting for an invitation, her expression knowing. "Sheriff needs those statements, and there's someone here to see you both." "Who?" Gabe asked. "Man named Thomas Wilson, says his ranch borders Morrison's property, says he has a proposition." They followed Rosie downstairs. Thomas Wilson stood in the sitting room, a big man in his 60s with a weathered face and kind eyes. He removed his hat when Clara entered. "Mrs. Bennett, Morrison, I'm sorry for your troubles." "Thank you," Gabe said cautiously. "Rosie said you had a proposition." "I do." Wilson turned his hat in his hands. "I heard about what happened to your place. Terrible thing. But I also heard about what you did standing up to Lucas Taggart. That took courage." "Just did what needed doing," Gabe said. "Maybe so, but it needed doing, and you did it." Wilson looked between them. "I'm getting old. My sons moved east, don't want the ranch. I've been thinking about selling, but I wanted it to go to someone who'd respect the land, someone with integrity." Clara felt Gabe tense beside her. "Sir, I appreciate the thought, but I can't afford—" "I'm not asking you to buy it," Wilson interrupted. "I'm asking you to partner with me. You provide the labor, the horse breeding expertise. I provide the land, the capital to get started. We split profits 50-50 until you've earned enough to buy me out. Then it's yours." Gabe stared at him. "Why would you do that?" Wilson's expression turned solemn. "Because my grandson is half Cheyenne. My daughter married a scout good man who died at Little Bighorn. The boy's 10 years old now, smart as a whip, but he's already learning what it means to be different in a white man's world. I want him to see that a man can make something of himself regardless of blood. Want him to have hope. You'd be giving him that, giving him an example to follow." Clara saw Gabe's throat work as he swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Say you'll think about it. Say anything but no." Wilson put his hat back on. "I'll give you a few days to decide." "But Morrison, Mrs. Bennett—" He looked at Clara with something like respect. "This territory needs good people. People willing to stand for what's right. Don't let the bastards run you off." After Wilson left, Clara and Gabe sat in silence. Sheriff Whitmore came and took their statements, his questions thorough but fair. When he finished, he stood and looked down at them. "You two caused me more trouble in 1 week than I've had in 3 years, he said, but he was almost smiling. "But you also did what I should have done long ago. Ended the Taggart brothers' reign. For that you have my thanks." "What happens now?" Clara asked. "Now you rebuild. Live your lives. Let the town gossip until they get tired of it and move on to the next scandal." Whitmore headed for the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think you two are good for each other. Don't let fear stop you from taking what happiness you can find. Life's too short and too hard for that." After he left, Gabe turned to Clara. "Wilson's offer, it's a good one. More than I could have hoped for. But it means staying here, building a life in a town that doesn't fully accept either of us. Facing the judgment, the whispers, the people who will always see me as a half-breed, and you as the woman I bought." Clara took his hand. "I faced worse than whispers in that auction block, survived worse than judgment. I can survive this too. Question is, can you—" Gabe's grip tightened. "With you beside me? Yes, I think I can." "Then we say yes. We accept Wilson's offer, we rebuild, and we make a life here. Together." "Together," Gabe repeated. The word sounded like a promise. That night, Clara lay in the narrow bed in Rosie's boarding house and thought about the future. About the ranch they'd build, the horses they'd raise, the life they'd create from the ashes of everything they'd lost. It wouldn't be easy. The town would talk. Some would never accept them, but others would slowly as they proved themselves through hard work and integrity. She thought about Jacob, about the life they'd had and the life they'd lost. She didn't love Gabe the same way she'd loved Jacob. That love had been built over years, gentle and comfortable. This love was different, forged in fire and blood, fierce and necessary. But it was real, and it was hers. Across the room, Gabe slept in the chair by the fire, his rifle across his knees even in sleep. Always watchful, always protecting. Clara smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow they'd give Thomas Wilson their answer. Would start planning their future, their partnership in business and in life. Would take the first steps toward building something good from all the pain and violence. But tonight, she was simply grateful. Grateful to be alive. Grateful for the man who'd stepped forward when no one else would. Grateful for the second chance she'd never expected to get. Outside, the snow had stopped. Through the window, Clara could see stars emerging from behind the clouds, cold and bright and eternal. The world kept turning. Life went on. And for the first time since Jacob died, Clara Bennett was ready to live it. Spring came slowly to Wyoming territory that year. Clara stood in the doorway of the new barn, watching Gabe work with a young Mustang in the corral. 3 months had passed since the night Lucas Taggart died, 3 months since she and Gabe had accepted Thomas Wilson's offer. The old man had been true to his word. Half his ranch was now theirs to build on, and they'd spent every daylight hour doing exactly that. The barn had gone up first, built with lumber from Sweetwater Station and help from men Clara had never expected. Thomas Wilson's ranch hands. Sheriff Whitmore on his day off. Even Dr. Harrison had spent a Saturday hammering nails, his thin arms surprisingly strong. Not everyone in town had helped. Some still crossed the street when they saw Gabe coming. Some still whispered about the widow who lived with a half-breed, though she wore no ring. But enough had helped. Enough had decided that what Gabe and Clara represented, courage, integrity, the refusal to bow to evil, mattered more than blood or scandal. "You're staring again," Rosie's voice said behind her. Clara turned. Rosie had ridden out from town with supplies, as she did every week. The Chinese woman had become something more than a friend. She was family now, in the way chosen family always runs deeper than blood. "Can't help it," Clara said. "He's good with them. The horses trust him." "And you trust him?" It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. "With my life." Rosie set down her basket and studied Clara's face. "You look different. Happier." "I am." Clara touched the scar on her temple, now healed into a thin white line. "Strange, isn't it? 3 months ago I was ready to die. Now I wake up every morning grateful to be alive." "That's not strange. That's healing." Rosie's expression softened. "But there's something else. Something you're not telling me." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. Rosie saw too much, always had. "We're getting married. Next week. Nothing fancy, just Whitmore presiding and maybe you and Thomas Wilson as witnesses. If you'll come." "If I'll come," Rosie laughed. "Try keeping me away. Though I have to say, took you too long enough. Been dancing around each other like nervous colts since January." "We wanted to be sure. Both of us have been married before. We know what it costs, what it means." "And you're sure now?" Clara looked back at Gabe. He was speaking softly to the Mustang, his hand outstretched, patient as stone. The horse's ears flickered forward, curious. Trust being built one moment at a time. "Yes," Clara said. "I'm sure." That night, after Rosie had left and the horses were fed and settled, Clara and Gabe sat on the porch of the cabin they'd built. It was small, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was theirs. Built with their own hands on land, they were earning through sweat and determination. "Rosie knows," Clara said. Gabe smiled. "Course she does. Woman knows everything. She's happy for us. Good, because I want her blessing. Want everyone who matters to know this is real, this is right. Gabe took Clara's hand. You having second thoughts? No, you, not one. His thumb traced circles on her palm. But I need to tell you something. About my first engagement. About Rebecca. Clara waited. Gabe had mentioned Rebecca only once that first night in his cabin. He'd never spoken of her since. I loved her, he said quietly. Loved her from the time we were children. But I don't think she ever really saw me. She saw who she wanted me to be, more white than Lakota, more civilized than wild. She asked me to cut my hair short, to stop speaking Lakota, to pretend my mother never existed. And I did it, because I thought that's what love required. Sacrifice, erasure. His voice roughened. When she died, part of me was relieved. Not that she was gone, I grieved for her, for the life we'd planned. But relieved that I didn't have to keep pretending, didn't have to keep cutting away pieces of myself to fit her vision. He turned to Clara, his eyes fierce. You've never asked me to be anything but what I am. Never flinched from my blood, my past, my scars. You see me, Clara. All of me. And you stay. That's worth more than any pretty words or promises. Clara's throat tightened. Jacob was a good man, but he was safe. Predictable. I loved him, but I was never challenged by him. Never pushed to be more than I was. With you. She paused, searching for words. With you I'm more. Braver. Stronger. More myself than I've ever been. That's not me. That's you. You always had that strength. Maybe, but you helped me find it again. Helped me remember I'm more than grief and fear. Gabe pulled her close, and Clara rested her head against his shoulder. Above them, stars wheeled across the black sky, countless and cold and beautiful. Next week, Gabe murmured. You'll be Clara Morrison. Yes. You ready for that? For all it means in this territory? Clara thought about the whispers, the judgment, the people who would never accept them. Thought about the long winters and hard work and uncertainty that frontier life demanded. Thought about building a future with a man the world said she shouldn't love. I'm ready, she said. The wedding took place on a Tuesday morning in late April. No church would have them. Clara had asked 3, and all 3 ministers had politely declined. So they stood in Thomas Wilson's front parlor, with Sheriff Whitmore reading from a legal text since he had no religious authority. Do you, Gabriel Morrison, take Clara Bennett to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Clara Bennett, take Gabriel Morrison to be your lawfully wedded husband? Clara looked at Gabe, at this man who'd bought her freedom and nearly died protecting her. At this man who saw her scars and called them beautiful. At this man who made her believe in second chances. I do. Whitmore closed his book. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. Morrison, you may kiss your bride. Gabe's kiss was gentle, reverent, full of promises Clara knew he'd keep. When they pulled apart, Rosie was crying. Thomas Wilson was grinning, and Whitmore was trying to hide a smile. Congratulations, the sheriff said, shaking Gabe's hand. You're braver than I am taking on marriage and a ranch at the same time. Stupid, you mean, Gabe said, but he was smiling. They celebrated with a simple meal, roast chicken, fresh bread, apple pie Rosie had baked. Wilson gave them a set of silver candlesticks that had belonged to his late wife. Rosie gave Clara a quilt she'd sewn herself, each square a different pattern and color. Whitmore gave them a bottle of whiskey and some practical advice about registering their partnership with the territorial office. As the sun set, they rode back to their ranch, to their cabin, to their life. Clara sat in front of Gabe on Thunder, his arms around her, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. That night in the loft bedroom of their small cabin, Gabe was careful with her. Gentle. As if she might break. Clara stopped him with a hand on his chest. I'm not fragile, she said. "I'm not something that needs protecting from life, from living." "I know, but you've been hurt. I don't want to. I've been hurt, but I'm not broken." Clara kissed him, fierce and demanding. "I'm here. I'm alive, and I want this. Want you. All of you." So Gabe stopped being careful, stopped holding back, and Clara lost herself in him in the heat and need and rightness of it. This wasn't like her wedding night with Jacob, sweet and awkward, and full of nervous laughter. This was raw and real, two people who'd survived hell finding heaven in each other's arms. Afterward, they lay tangled together under Rosie's quilt. Gabe traced the scar on Clara's temple with one finger. "Does it hurt still?" "Sometimes. When storms are coming, I feel it ache." She touched the scar on his face, the one that ran from temple to jaw. "What about yours?" "Same. Old wounds remember." "Good," Clara said. "We should remember. Should carry the scars. They're proof we survived." Gabe pulled her closer. "You know this won't be easy. Building this ranch, this life. There'll be hard times. Winters we barely make it through. People who'll never accept us. I know. And children, if we have them, they'll face the same prejudice I did. Maybe worse, being half-white, half-Lakota, raised by parents the town gossips about." "I know that too." Clara propped herself up on one elbow. "Gabriel Morrison, are you trying to scare me away?" "No, just want you to know what you've signed up for. I signed up for you, for this life, for whatever comes, and I don't scare easy anymore." She kissed him softly. "Lucas Taggart couldn't break me. A little gossip won't either." Gabe's laugh was quiet in the darkness. "No, I suppose it won't." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Clara's last thought before sleep took her was that she was home. Not in Kansas, with its memories of Jacob. Not in California, with its promise of a fresh start. But here in this small cabin in Wyoming territory, with this scarred, beautiful man who loved her. Summer brought challenges. A drought that lasted 6 weeks, leaving the grass brown and the water low. 2 horses they'd bought with Wilson's money went lame, a setback that cost them time and profit, and the town's judgment never fully disappeared. But there were victories too. 3 Mustangs gentled and sold at good prices. A small vegetable garden that somehow survived the drought, yielding enough to feed them and have some to sell. Letters from Clara's sister Sarah, who'd finally learned what had happened and was planning to visit come fall. And there were the small moments Clara treasured most. Gabe teaching her to ride like a cavalry scout, fast and low and fearless. The 2 of them working side by side to mend fences, their hands moving in rhythm. Evenings on the porch reading aloud from books Rosie brought from town. The way Gabe smiled at her across the breakfast table like she was the best thing he'd ever seen. One August afternoon, Clara was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses moving fast. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle Gabe insisted she keep nearby. But it was Rosie who appeared, followed by Sheriff Whitmore and Thomas Wilson. Their faces were grave. "What's wrong?" Clara asked, fear spiking through her. "Where's Gabe?" Whitmore asked. "In the corral." "Why, what's happened?" "Nothing yet, but it might." Whitmore dismounted. "Lucas Taggart's cousin rode into town this morning. Marcus Taggart from Texas. He's asking questions about his cousin's death. About you and Gabe." Clara's blood went cold. "Is he looking for revenge?" "Don't know yet, but I wanted to warn you. Keep your eyes open. Don't go anywhere alone." Gabe appeared from the corral, wiping sweat from his face. He took one look at their visitors, and his expression hardened. "Taggart." "The cousin," Whitmore confirmed. "Marcus, you know him." "Heard of him. Ranger, if memory serves. Good tracker, better shot." Gabe's hand moved to his hip, checking his gun. "He coming here?" "Not yet. He's at the hotel being real polite, asking real careful questions. But I don't trust it." "Neither do I." Gabe looked at Clara. You should go to Rosie's. Stay in town where there are witnesses. No. Clara's voice was firm. I'm not running again. This is my home. Our home. I stay. Clara. I said no. She crossed to stand beside him. We face this together. That's what marriage means. Gabe looked like he wanted to argue, but Thomas Wilson spoke up. She's right, Morrison. Running makes you look guilty. Standing your ground shows you've got nothing to hide. I'll post a deputy nearby, Whitmore said. Keep an eye on the place, and if Taggart makes any threats, I'll arrest him. On what charge? Gabe asked bitterly. Being related to a criminal? On whatever charge I can make stick. Whitmore's expression was hard. I'm done with the Taggarts terrorizing good people. This one tries anything, I'll throw him in a cell and lose the key. After they left, Clara and Gabe stood in the yard watching the dust from their horses settle. Thunder whinnied from the corral. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. You should have gone to town, Gabe said quietly. And leave you here alone, not a chance. I can take care of myself. So can I. Clara took his hand. We made vows, Gabriel, for better or worse. This is worse, so we face it together. That night they both slept light. Gabe kept his rifle close, and Clara had her revolver under her pillow. Every sound made them tense, an owl's call, a coyote's howl, the wind in the trees. But nothing happened. Dawn came peaceful and golden, and they were still alive. 3 days passed with no sign of Marcus Taggart. Clara began to think maybe he'd moved on, decided revenge wasn't worth the trouble. Then on the 4th day he appeared. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw the rider approaching. Tall, dark-haired, sitting his horse with military precision. He wore a Texas Ranger's badge and carried himself like a man who knew how to use the guns at his hip. Mrs. Morrison, he called out, tipping his hat. I'm Marcus Taggart. I'd like to speak with you and your husband if that's amenable. Clara didn't move. Gabe's in the barn. I'll get him. Much obliged. She found Gabe mucking stalls, told him quick and quiet. He grabbed his rifle, and they walked out together. Marcus Taggart had dismounted and stood holding his horse's reins, making no threatening moves. Up close, Clara could see the resemblance to Lucas, the same sharp features, same cold eyes. But there was something different too, a weariness, a sorrow. Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Morrison. Taggart nodded to each of them. I appreciate you seeing me. Don't have much choice, Gabe said. You're on my land. True enough. Taggart looked between them. I'll be direct. My cousin Lucas wrote me letters, told me about finding a woman who'd murdered his brother, told me about a half-breed who stole that woman, told me he was going to get justice. That's not what happened, Clara said. Her voice was steady despite her racing heart. No, ma'am, I don't imagine it is. Taggart's expression was unreadable. See, I knew Lucas, knew Wade too. They were my cousins, and I loved them the way family does. But I also knew what they were, knew the things they did. He looked at Clara directly. Lucas told me you shot Wade in self-defense. Claimed it was unprovoked, but I could read between the lines. Wade was always rough with women, and Lucas... He shook his head. Lucas never forgave the North for winning. Never accepted that the war was over. He saw shadows and enemies everywhere. So why are you here? Gabe asked. His rifle was lowered but ready. Because they were family. Because I needed to see for myself what happened. Needed to look you both in the eye and decide if justice was served or if murder was committed. Taggart's gaze was steady, assessing. And I've decided. Clara held her breath. Lucas got what was coming to him. He went after an innocent woman, tried to execute her and the man protecting her. Sheriff Whitmore did his job. Taggart's jaw tightened. I don't like it. Don't like that my cousins are dead. But I can't fault the law for working the way it should. He held out his hand to Gabe. You're a good man, Morrison. Better than my cousins deserve to face. You've got my word. No revenge, no vendetta. The Taggart family's business with you is finished. Gabe stared at the offered hand for a long moment. Then he set down his rifle and shook it. Thank you. That takes courage, accepting hard truths about family. Does. But truth is truth whether we like it or not. Taggart turned to Clara. Ma'am, I'm sorry for what my cousins put you through. Sorry you had to kill to survive. That's a burden no woman should carry. Clara's eyes burned with unexpected tears. Thank you for understanding. Taggart mounted his horse. I'll be heading back to Texas tomorrow, but I wanted you to know you've got nothing to fear from me or mine. Live your lives. Be happy. That's the best revenge against men like Lucas and Wade. He rode away, and Clara and Gabe stood watching until he disappeared over the horizon. Then Clara turned to her husband and buried her face in his chest, sobbing with relief. It's over, she said. Finally, it's over. Gabe's arms came around her strong and sure. Yes, it's over. That night they made love with a desperate tenderness, celebrating life and survival, and the future that was finally truly theirs. And when Clara fell asleep, she dreamed not of auction blocks or gunfire, but of horses running free across open prairie and children's laughter, and a life built on love and courage. The years that followed were good ones, hard but good. The ranch prospered. The horses they bred became known throughout the territory for their spirit and reliability. Clara started teaching children not in a proper school, but in their cabin on Sunday afternoons, the way frontier teachers always had. Word spread, and soon she had 10 students, then 15. Sarah came to visit that fall and stayed through winter, her presence a bridge between Clara's past and present. The sisters talked long into the night, and Clara told her everything: Jacob's death, the attack, the auction, Gabe's rescue. Sarah wept and held her, and called Gabe a blessing, which made him duck his head in embarrassment. Children came eventually. A daughter first born in a blizzard, with only Rosie to help deliver her. They named her Hope, because that's what she represented. Then a son 2 years later, strong and dark-haired like his father. They named him Jacob Gabriel, honoring both the past and present. And through it all, through the hard winters and lean years and moments of doubt, Clara and Gabe built something that lasted. Not just a ranch, but a life, a family, a legacy. 20 years after that December day when Clara Bennett stood bleeding on an auction block, she stood on the porch of a real house, not a cabin anymore, but a proper 2-story home with glass windows and a wraparound porch. Her hair was streaked with gray now, and her hands bore the calluses of hard work. The scar on her temple had faded, but never disappeared. Gabe came up behind her, his arms circling her waist. He was graying too, his face more weathered, but his eyes still held that fierce tenderness that had captured her heart. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Clara leaned back against him. "That I was supposed to die that day, was supposed to be used and broken and discarded. But you stepped forward. You said, 'She's mine to protect,' and you meant it." "Still do." "I know." Clara turned in his arms. "But I'm not just yours to protect anymore. I'm yours to love, and you're mine. That's what we built here. Not just protection, but partnership, love, family." "Best thing I ever did was step forward that day," Gabe said. "Best thing I ever did was survive it." Clara kissed him, tasting 20 years of shared life, shared struggle, shared joy. "We survived everything they threw at us, and we're still standing." "Always will be," Gabe promised, "together." And they were.